Good morning. My name is Garrett Petrie. I am on the Minnesota Department of Education PBIS management team, so I'm presenting these slides on behalf of the team. I'm going to include an overview, an update of the state initiative, some considerations for implementation and transition during these times as you're thinking and participating in breakout sessions over the next 2 days, along with some resources and examples with a range of partners from schools, districts, co-ops, and also the regions within Minnesota, our 3 regions, North, Metro, Twin Cities, and South, and also the National Center on PBIS. It's a large community practice that gives us this knowledge and these examples to share with you. So we really appreciate people taking the time to participate in these conversations. So welcome again to the Institute itself. There's a range of participants this morning with a range of experiences. And we believe that you're going to find that these sessions are going to meet those needs, the ranges that you're looking for, with real examples, implementation that you can take back to your teams at school and district levels, and including your community. Bring back this information, think about the positive changes that you want to make, and use this as an opportunity to bring it back and make those changes yourselves. When you're considering the needs of individual students, especially those with special needs, those who've experienced recent trauma and historical trauma inequities, it's really important to recognize those needs in the context of the entire school community, and that's something with PBIS that's critical. So when you think about that range of interactions that a student would have, and also the lived experiences within classroom, non-classroom, and what's been more critical than ever, especially in the last spring, is those family support systems, which has become the physical environment for all these settings as we finished up the 2020 school year, and as we think about what that might mean for the next school year. So it really does continue to be an important time of transition, and we're right in the mix of it, all of us at these moments. With the multi-tiered positive behavior supports with PBIS, the idea is to help students in this ongoing extended transitions with these predictable structures that you guys have built, or ones that you're layering on or adding in to ensure that those supports are happening. But we started by being honest back in March that we really didn't have all the answers to what adaptations to those supports might have been needed, what they were going to look like. However, with PBIS implementing schools in Minnesota, you guys were really helpful in sharing back information, what that successful transition to the context of that new setting for most of you, that distance learning setting, was a setting that even though educators, families, and staff and students did not necessarily opt into that, you showed us signs of success where your teams tied all of your supports into that existing multi-tiered subsystem of support, like the PBIS framework that you developed for your schools. So during these times, we really continue to acknowledge the importance of being kind to ourselves, just like for this morning, giving us positive feedback, giving us helpful feedback in positive ways, as an example of the ways that we rely on those tiered systems of supports at school and family levels. So continuing to think about how we improve them and build on those lessons learned across multiple settings as we plan to possible scenarios that you might be planning for during the summer about where students are going to be receiving instructions and what transitions will require us to be just as prepared to keep those consistent systems positive and in place. So to start, the Institute really highlighted these 4 areas of our 10 Minnesota commitments to equity from our department. And it starts with prioritizing equity itself. The other piece that's really critical is the things that matter. So for PBIS framework, things like a tiered fidelity inventory to measure with the supports that you have chosen to provide at a school or district level, how you ensure that those are in place for students, given the possibility of multiple different environments where you need positive supports to occur for a range of student needs. Valuing people is really critical as we think about the historic inequities. We think about the recent events in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, in our nation and in the world. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the upcoming section. And then thinking about improving those conditions for learning, knowing that there are a lot of conditions that you guys might be planning for, including when in-person comes back, what are those supports going to look like in order to make sure that kids have those supports to be successful? So we begin after really thinking about equity and valuing people with honoring the life of George Floyd and the lives of every person that were cut short due to racism. And when you think about these local, national, and international, the mourning for George Floyd is more about this one tragic incident. You think about a result of generations of systemic racism that really do threaten the dignity of our state's Black communities, Indigenous communities, and communities of color. George Floyd was a beloved father. He was an uncle, cousin, nephew, neighbor, and he was a friend to many. So we watched in horror as George Floyd's humanity was taken away from him. And Minnesota does have this dark history of inflicting violence on Black communities, Indigenous communities, and communities of color, notably with the hanging of 38 Dakota men in Mankato in 1862, which was the largest mass execution in United States history, and also the lynching of the 3 Black men, which was recognized yesterday, 100 years to the date, of Elias Clayton, Elmer Jackson, and Isaac McGee here in Duluth. So as we think through these, our state of Minnesota put out this proclamation because we know it's not going to happen overnight, and that it's just going to happen just through natural feelings. We actually need to be able to address it and deconstruct the generations of systemic racism in our state. And PBIS Framework will talk more about how that can be part of building that, deconstructing, and putting something positive in place to ensure that people, no matter what their race, culture, ethnicity, can be safe and thrive. So with that, just thinking about this greater context in Minnesota with the PBIS initiative, and knowing that PBIS is that framework where you choose what are the things you put in place to prevent problem behavior, the instructions and supports that are required for all students so that they get the social, emotional, behavioral needs met. And the initiative itself in Minnesota has always been about evidence-based implementation. So whether it was cohort training or district structures or other things that were supported in Minnesota, it was always about team-based implementation, and it continues to be, so that the things that naturally will happen can happen beyond cohort training, the initial training you might have had from your district, the initial workshop that you might have gone to. It's about building those capacity, skills, and competency and beliefs in those teams themselves. So when you look at our cohorts 1 through 15, as we look at 15 years of the initiative, you can see the spread and getting across Minnesota to ensure that these happens, that teams have these supports. And putting it in that context of the diversity of also the school ages and the school population served. Think of 769 schools that have gone through cohort training as just one example. And think through the differences in elementary schools, secondary schools, and ALCs who've all gone through and done the training to be able to do this well over time. And there was recognition last week, so congratulations and thank you to all the exemplar schools who received recognition. And our commissioner was really sincere to notice that the students are at the heart of everything that we do. She recognizes the critical needs that they need to feel supported. And then especially as we're thinking through these times, which can be challenging and bring about traumas, past and present. So she really thanks you, and thinking about the way that you care and support our students are that pieces that puts our community as a whole on a better path. So thank you to those of you who have applied for recognition through Sustaining Exemplar, schools and districts. And we hope you continue to give back in that way and share about your success as well. And during this time, what's really critical is not only the possibility of distance learning continuing through the summer for summer school, extended school year, but also preparing for what that might look like under those 3 possible models that you might be experiencing at a school or district level in the fall. So when we got started back in March, our message really was to be kind to yourself and everyone else. We were all trying something new at that time, but also in the fall, we might be returning to something that's a little less familiar. It might have been a while since we've seen face-to-face instruction, been in a classroom setting, been in non-classroom settings. And maybe we have some gaps that need to be addressed. So you want to really be kind to yourself and understanding. And then as you're thinking through what those supports look like, again, tying it back to the framework, you got to consider these strategies so that you don't feel like you have to start from scratch. Think about continuing to use the same language. Your team worked on that, developed that in your PBIS framework. So if your school already had that PBIS framework in place, Your teachers should continue using these consistent language expectations that'll help teachers and students feel connected to the familiar practices that they've been experiencing. And hopefully that's true online as well, that you can bring that back in to those classroom settings. For example, if your school had that motto displayed around the school building, put that motto in the banner of your online learning portal if you haven't yet, or think about adding it to the bottom of your email if that's the way that you're mostly communicating during these times and into the future. And when you think about defining your expectations, do include online. We're going to see some examples of schools and programs that have done that. And there's a critical nature to it because not everything is the same. So in online, you might have students that are familiar with being online, but not with school and academic settings. So think about defining those expectations, the use of chat boxes, muting and unmuting, what raising a virtual hand to be called on. Think about teaching those through the summer and then into the fall as well as students return. Practicing those expected behaviors, making sure that you can individually connect with the students and be able to teach them through what those things are. They're going to need it more than ever in August, online settings, hybrid settings, or face-to-face. And keep those positive and familiar routines. If there's something new that you've done with distance learning, keep doing that and do it well. As new students from new grades come and join you, they might need to get caught up with it, but be positive, be pleasant right from the start, and make sure that you're reaching those students that you know historically their experiences have seen that they have the most needs. Be ready on day one to do that or before the school year starts to engage them. And examples of these are in the remote instruction guide. So Grandview and West Tonka was able to contribute one of their distance learning matrices. And it was helpful to give back and see what those examples looked like. And other schools across Minnesota were able to contribute that as well. So you see an example from Deer River of King Elementary School, and they defined them within that couple weeks when they had the distance learning period, what school work was gonna look like, but then separating that, what are the technology needs? You can see how they separated that. They also had a piece where it was some guidance around what that might look like at home so that families could do the same things when supporting their students and families and children at home. You get an example from Chanhassen High School as well, where they kept things going that were working really well for them. So if you have seen them, some of their announcements through social media that they share with others, just their Pride Ticket nomination, they put it in a Google form so that you can nominate those students and be able to continue to recognize them, drive over, give them something, greet them at the door, socially distant. But also the Goose Award, they kept that going as well, recognizing staff and their contributions there as well. And in Leaf River, White Pine, and Elm Tree Academy in the Freshwater Education District, just looking at what they did for students in terms of really being able to identify that for family, those supports, they already had respectful, responsible, self-advocate, and safe, but they also tied it back to those community and home settings in terms of what were they going to be able to do when they had conflicts at home, or when there were challenges where they might have to share technologies at home with other family members. So a really great example there with kids that you can envision having some of the most intensive needs, getting those predictable supports through distance learning. And as we're thinking about what that transition may look like for hybrid or for the transition to in-person learning supports, there are 4 resources that we'd like to highlight from PBIS.org that have been informed by the work that you guys have been doing and thinking about what it's going to look like when we come back to transition and be face-to-face again. So here's a few considerations for you as you're thinking about what contingency planning and then also in-person supports may look like. The first one is to really focus on separating your action items as to planning this summer, prior to return. What are those connections you're going to make? The initial return in that moment, in that first week or in that welcome back week, what is that going to look like? Be clear about those action items so that you guys can be there to support families for that transition. And then thinking about that post-initial return, what are those things that need to be retaught? But what are those things that also as part of contingency planning might need to be in place? And when you think about the possibility that you might have had staff changes since the spring, this could be a really good time in the early fall to think about doing a fidelity assessment, assess that impact, see what kind of action steps might be there to implement tiered supports at tiers 1, 2, and 3. And anything that you've learned for distance learning in the past 3-4 months, try to incorporate some of those positive things that have been gleaned, whether it's the expectation matrices. So if you did have to go back to distance learning, or that use of technology that you might want to continue, would you bridge homework and other types of expectations that might be outside of the school day? Keep building those and building those in a positive way for the 21st century learners that we have in our classrooms and community. And with all of that, build it into your MTSS structure to make sure that you can identify and plan for and prepare for any issues related to equity. If you know that students hadn't been as engaged during distance learning, what are the things you can do to prepare if distance learning continues? And what are the things that you can put in place in order to support them during that transition? One quick way, a no-cost thing if you haven't considered doing it yet, which is a new body of research, are positive greetings at the door. This simple classroom-wide 4-component is all built on a tier 1 structure. It can be done in distance learning as well, and it's recommended in the PBIS guides. But think about it in that tiered system. So if you have online learning, if you're coming back face-to-face in a hybrid model or a complete brick and mortar setting, really think about all students. When you see them for the first time at the beginning of a class, greet them the way they would like to be greeted as they enter the classroom. Be really specific in ways that they find pleasant and meaningful. But then it's also a time to think about how things went for the entire class. Are there things you can remind them as they enter into the classroom, whether it's muting upon arrival or the ways that they might chat in the chat box? Or when they come in, are they sitting down in their class, in their desks, doing any kind of pre-work that maybe needs to be done? Whatever those expectations are, that's your time to remind all students. But within that, there's also the layered supports that some students you might notice had some specific things that maybe you talked about at the end of class or at the end of the day with them. Be ready, be prepared to give them some gentle reminders privately off to the side as they come in or in a private chat. What are the things that they might have struggled with the previous day that you can help them with that transition? And then for those students that you know have struggled or haven't been as engaged, be really specific with the behavior praise if they show up to class. Things like if they're coming in and you haven't seen them in a while, don't remind them that piece, remind them about the piece of it's really great to see you. So starting with that and then building on that and taking data to ensure that you are ensuring that those students are engaged actively and you're a part of that greeting and they're a part of that community. So when we think about equitable outcomes within the PBIS framework, the 5-point intervention approach really is that critical piece as you're thinking through and seeing examples in the breakout sessions from schools and districts these 2 days. Making sure you're disaggregating your discipline data and you are looking at race ethnicity reports. Making sure that the culturally responsive school-wide PBIS framework you have matches. If it's been a while since you've developed your expectations, how do you get feedback from families and students about whether or not the specific details within your expectations, your 3 to 5, are matching the culture and background of the students in the community? Of course, effective academic instruction, but in measurable ways, making sure that you're reaching all of those students, making sure that your policies reflect community values, but also that they are positive and proactive and not on the punitive side. Making sure that when you think about if we do identify bias, which we all have, what are those things that we can do? Concrete steps I can do during a vulnerable decision point when I'm writing a referral or I'm preparing to decide whether or not to suspend a student, to do something maybe different or slow that whole process down so that we are not disengaging students just as a matter of do this, then this happens. So these are just 5 ways that as the information comes back, that we hope you can share back real examples for your schools and districts to share with others as well. And PBIS apps from the PBIS Center have lots of equity resources. So if you've got some time to yourself and you want to look more into instructional videos, you can do that. There are some live webinars where you'll be able to chat with others and be able to take questions and find out more about how you might use Swiss as a way to drill down into your data. And also your disproportionality. What do you do when you do identify gaps and risk factors? And then in general, just things that you can take back to your team about the long research about disproportionality around suspensions. And then also what's available is a school climate survey. So in Minnesota, we have the school climate survey that we hope you find value in and are able to use that for action planning. There's also a school climate survey, and there's information at that link as well, thinking about students and families and staff feeling valued in their schools and programs. So hope you find these valuable and give us feedback on these as well. So as you prepare for the Institute, as we prepare to transition to the breakout sessions, really think about and look at how these practices within these schools and districts are promoting equitable outcomes in education, and how you might be able to bring back to your school and community to be able to do the same things. Think about that 15-year history and know that there is a community out there that if you haven't been as engaged or a part of in different ways, through ranging from social media, checking websites, emailing with staff, checking out the Sustaining Exemplar school list if you'd like to go see a program that's maybe a little bit like yours, or with a background that's like yours or a community like yours, check them out, or just give them an email or a phone call and say, hey, thanks. And those talented and dedicated trainers, if you're wanting to be part of that process, we do have links on our website where you can share that information that you'd like to be part of our community to support that. And know that there are those regional staff from North, Twin Cities Metro, and the South to support you. And our MDE staff is there as well if you have any questions. And what we've noticed over the past 15 years, which is really critical, is that when teams have access to their own practice and their implementation data, your ability to action plan and improve is outstanding. And you're going to see that in the sessions. And you'll be able to follow up and find out information by just following up with the presenters and asking them what are those things that they did that were the key to their sustaining their efforts. So with that, we really hope you enjoy the Institute. Again, if you have any questions or concerns, technical questions, you can email us at mde.pbis@state.mn.us. And with that, I'm just going to transfer back over and stop sharing my screen so that our team can guide you through the next steps.
Thanks, Garrett. That was awesome. Very helpful. Wonderful kickoff to what we're doing here today. So for everybody, you should have the links, hopefully. So for this session that you're in right now, we are going to have Mark Zieberth presenting on PBIS 101. So I'm going to let him start sharing his screen whenever he's ready. We do have a transition time built in for the next 15 minutes. And if you were wanting to attend the session on Swiss, school-wide information and system update, that one will be on the other link. So now is your transition time to choose which session you want. You can always go in between sessions. Everybody will be muted on entry, so it won't be interrupting our presenters if you wanted to switch sessions at all. But now is your time. We're going to give you the next 15 minutes to do your transition, and then our presenters will start at 9:45. Presenters in both sessions, if there's any assistance that you need with getting things on Zoom, just let me know. You can send me a message in the chat if you need any support.
Can everyone hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Okay, great.